Hello, my name is Max, and I'm working for the Westfield Athenaeum, and today we are going to be looking inside the mystery box, where I have given a list of prompts to all of my colleagues, and they have selected a group of books that they think that I will enjoy. So I will be going through today and reading what they have picked out for me and discussing whether or not that is something that would interest me as a reader. Alright, so the first book we have is White Trash Warlock by David R. Slayton. Just going off of what I'm reading on the back, I like the start. Not all magicians go to schools of magic, so we're already set kind of in the real world outside of your Hogwarts type scenario. And just kind of halfway down, it's interesting. And the line that gets me is, years after his brother had him committed to a psych ward. I would say that based on the title and the description I'm reading, this is something that I would consider reading. I don't know if it's the strongest up at the top of my list, but this is certainly going to go on my ever-growing extensive book list. Alright, next up, we have Battle of the Linguist Mages. Already, I like on the title cover here, I like the way that it's kind of a neon sign. Okay, I would like to encourage everybody to read the description of this book on their own, because this is phenomenal. I really am not clear what this book is about, other than someone who plays virtual reality video games and is fighting anarchists. But what more do you need in a book description, honestly? So I think this one is probably going to go a little bit higher up on my priority list of books to read. So we're going to put this over in the number one pile. This is one that was recommended that we unfortunately were not able to procure a copy of. This one is called WE3 by Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly. What it looks like is WE3, the title, is referring to Animal Weapon 3, which is a group of 3 house pets whose nervous systems have been amplified to match their terrifying mechanical exoskeletons. And I guess they are, and I quote, weaponized for lethal combat by the government as they search for home and ward off the shadowy agency that created them. This actually sounds very interesting. Further on, the description does say that they're going to be decommissioned, and so I'm assuming that this is kind of their journey to freedom, as it were. Just by reading this, I can't remember the name of the author, but I'm a huge fan of the book Snow Crash, which in it has some bioengineered dogs who play a very important part in the story, but they kind of go into their thought process a little bit as like defenders of their castle in like this suburban wasteland, and I'm getting kind of that same almost near dystopian vibe from reading this. I think that we're going to put this in my top slot book list, which is going to be the priority books on my to-read list. So the next one that we have out of here is also one that we unfortunately were not able to get a book copy of. This is called Superior by Mark Miller and Lionel Yu. Interesting. So in reading through this, it looks like our protagonist is going to be a 12-year-old boy with multiple sclerosis who has lost his ability to walk, become blind in one eye, and he is encountered by, it looks like, a magic monkey named Orman, who could grant him a wish, and from what it seems, that turns him into a superhero for, it would appear to be a week before some final reckoning with this magical monkey. I will say the cover art does look like Shazam, who I know has had a movie in the last couple of years, and I'm a huge fan of DC Comics in general, so I do like that comparison on the cover. And certainly sounds like it's setting itself up to be an intense story in the superhero world-saving genre. I think in terms of chapter books as opposed to more graphic novel comic style, I tend to stay away from more superhero narratives. So this one I think would be still on my book list, but maybe a little bit further down. However, the emotional catch displayed in the summary certainly is one that kind of grabs you. We're gonna leave it in an on the book list, but maybe not quite as far towards the top. Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. Alright, so the back cover, we got some more standard fantasy tropes, mystery tropes. So we have main character, detective extraordinaire, confronted with a most baffling puzzle. It's pretty typical. Kidnapping of the secret daughter of someone important in their society. Yeah. What really draws my attention, a peculiar child whose reputed supernatural powers have captured the attention of collectors who trade in curiosities in this age of discovery. And that really sticks out to me. When we were putting this video together, I kind of wrote up a list of some of the books that I'm reading or have enjoyed reading, that it would be cool to see similar things on this list. One of them was a very intense retelling of the Alice in Wonderland story, and part of that hook is that a lot of the prominent antagonistic characters in that kind of collect people in that world, especially relating to magic, and it's certainly a very, very intense retelling, and I don't think quite from the back this is at that level, which is probably good, but that is certainly a hook that the person they're looking for is potentially being added to some magical people collection, and our main hero looks like they're going to go thwart that attempt, and in the journey of that, they are going to uncover secrets of their own past that has been kept buried, so we got some good character development in there. I'm struggling where to place this one. Honestly, I really, really like the cover. And the title, Things in Jars, I think kind of reinforces that antagonistic collection that's going on in the back. I think this one, I think, is still going to go on my book list, but might be kind of in the middle category a little further down, just because the back description does have some of those more standard tropes, and even if they are able to change that up, hopefully distinctly, that is something that I do look for, is finding material that kind of either breaks down or deconstructs genre tropes, or is looking to circumvent them in some way. And just from the back, I'm not quite sure if this lands in that category, but it's still one that I would like to have in my book list. So this one is Dead Astronauts by Jeff Vandermeer, who I have heard through the grapevine is kind of a weirder author and works on maybe some weirder works. Certainly by the cover, this is one that I would really gravitate towards if I saw it in a library or on a bookstore shelf, just by this psychedelic imagery that's kind of bleeding down the cover. And I see we have kind of some astronauts are floating around here. But one thing that I really like about the design of this, cover-wise, is that even though we have all of this bright colored bleed, the text is very visible and legible. Yeah, so just by reading the inside of this cover, hooked from the first word. I don't even know what this is about, which I think is the sign of a very successful synopsis, where you can draw readers in, even if they have absolutely no idea what the plot line is going to be. It's very short, and it really just outlines 6 or so very vague descriptions of characters, and then talks about that they're in a city with no name, fighting against an unnamed corporation. So really, what hooked me was this first sentence. A messianic blue fox who slips through warrens of time and space on a mysterious mission. I'm already hooked on this. There's a homeless woman haunted by a demon, 3 ragtag rebels, a raving madman who wanders the desert lost in the past, an invisible monster whose name he has forgotten, and of course this city with no name, and the all-powerful company. There are so many questions that are brought up by reading the inside of this book that I feel like I would be doing myself a disservice to not find out the answers to those. So this, I think, is going to be the top choice thus far. Let's see if I can read this title, Battle Chasers by Joe Madureira and 8 others. Alright, so it looks like from the description, this is an anthology of a released comic book series, which I love. I love when they collect them all into anthologies and I don't have to go chasing down 50 thin little volumes of something, and I can just read it all at once. So that's already a good selling point. This is another one that kind of doesn't detail plot or anything really happening in the book in its synopsis. It kind of goes through characters, and these, as opposed to the last one we saw, this one is a lot closer to like Dungeons and Dragons party style, where you have like your main character Gully searching for her missing father with the help of a legendary swordsman, a crafty wizard, an outlawed war golem, a notorious mercenary. So you have your more typical fantasy party dynamics. So it would be very interesting to see how the author and 8 others kind of break this down, if it's following more of the trope progressions for those characters, or if they're going to kind of deviate from that and be a little more deconstructionist with it. I do like the cover. It really does kind of call back to a lot of art that's more from my childhood, when I was reading and had the time to read a lot more comic books, a lot more graphic novels and stuff like that. This kind of reminds me of, I think it was through Dungeons and Dragons, where they published actually like a chapter book series that I remember reading a couple of when I was young, and this was kind of the vibe that the front covers had. So I do really gravitate towards that art style. It's very clean, and then the kind of more intense metal-like titling on there. I think just because there's not like a story hook in the description, and the characters don't have kind of that same mystery and unusualness comparatively to kind of a lot of tropes we see nowadays, this one might go a little bit lower on my read list. I'm still interested, but I don't think quite as much as some of the other things that I've seen. I can read it. You Feel It Just Below the Ribs by Jeffrey Cranor. Alright, so this one, I'm going to read the description because this one's very short. A fictional autobiography in an alternate 20th century that chronicles one woman's unusual life, including the price she pays to survive and the cost her choices hold for the society she is trying to save. Which, in terms of dystopia, is fairly in line with the tropes of that genre. I do like that it is expressly stating itself as an autobiography. A lot of, like, I think Hunger Games is the one that comes to my mind most when we talk about like the more accessible dystopian novels, and a lot of those are written in first person to kind of draw you into that world and draw you alongside that character, but they're still pitched kind of the same as like a third person narration. But to actually go out in the description and say autobiography, I like that because it allows you to kind of play more in some of the descriptors that you use to talk more about your character on a personal level without kind of stepping over that bounds of it's first to third person, but it's not really that narrative style. But it's autobiography, so it is that narrative style. So I do really like that. I think, unfortunately, this one kind of suffers from the shorter synopsis because you're not getting as much about the meat and potatoes of this book. So this is Middle Game by Shana McGuire. And the text here on the fingers, which I think is a clever use of that, is from the New York Times bestselling author of the award-winning book Every Heart a Doorway, which I'm also not familiar with. But I do like the kind of design of this, with the hand being the candle, and you kind of have all these little flames around it. I don't know how that relates to the book, but it looks real cool. Alright, so the inside cover has some interesting hooks in it. So first off, you meet Roger in the first paragraph, who is skilled with words and languages. It talks about how he understands things more intrinsically through the power of story. And then his twin sister, Dodger, who is the exact same but with numbers and contextualizes everything through the power of math. And then you get like, they're kind of human, they're not really human, they're not gods, but they're kind of gods, which, you know, is pretty standard in this type of literature. The thing that I like is the last paragraph, where you meet Reed, who is skilled in the alchemical arts and created both Roger and Dodger, and apparently is going to use them to ascend to godhood. And then you get these really fun, ominous lines at the end, which is, "Godhood is attainable, pray it isn't attained." That alone, that's a hook that I like. because it's very short and very ominous. And again, as someone who likes dystopian worlds, toppling society in their books, this is certainly one that appeals to me of that avenue. Plus, I really like the juxtaposition in my literature of kind of the more fantastical sides, such as like magic, and it's talking about like alchemy and all of that, with kind of the more like reality-based. You have like words and storytelling, but also math, which is a lot more logically provable in our world. So I think that being able to incorporate that with the fantasy elements really reinforces the world building in your story, and I think that the fact that that's present on the inside cover does draw me into this. I'm hopefully looking at a more secure world to exist in, and I really like those all-encapsulating environments. I mean, this is certainly also one that, I mean, they all look good, but this is certainly one that's going to go on my read list. I think not as prominently towards the top as some of the weirder titles, but this one is certainly going to be included. Alright, so this next one we have is Kill the Farm Boy by Delilah Dawson. Already a fan of that title. Themes, Chosen One, Dark Lord, good stuff. So I'll read this one too, this is pretty short. While on a mission to stop Loker and figure out the conundrum of the Chosen One, Gustav the Talking Goat, Fia the Unusually Tall, Argabella the Ensorcelled Bird? I'm not familiar with that word. And Grinda the Sandwich are joined by two others who have their own evil agendas. Really, the main hook to me there is that there's a talking goat named Gustav. Already, like, that's a selling point. And I think I can see Gustav back there on the title, walking behind who I'm assuming is the farm boy that they're going to try and kill. So I would certainly be interested in reading this one. So I think this is going to go on my list, probably somewhere towards the middle. So now we have Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams. Already another very psychedelic kind of cover. We're kind of bordering into the I can't read the title of your work. Alright, so the inside of this, immediately I can say this is going to go closer to the top of my book list. And I need to see when this was actually published initially. It looks like so this is 10 short stories by the author that are kind of all compiled into one, and it looks like the earliest one, Autofac, was initially copyright 1987 and 1955. And the inside jacket does also say that he wrote a lot of these at the height of the Cold War, which to me means this is something that I have to historically read, because I'm trying to go through a lot of earlier science fiction, and especially if this is one that can kind of set up a lot of what we see kind of later on in that style, especially in 10 shorter works. I really appreciate that as someone who has to read a lot on the go because of work and school and having a lot going on. So they do specifically describe him as mind-bending and genre-defining, and that they collected these 10 together as some of his earliest examples and warnings in science fiction of things like self-replicating machines. We have the shifting nature of reality and whether it is even possible to perceive the world as it truly exists. And my favorite, dark political allegory, which is always interesting to see in the context of its time period and then in the context of present day, seeing how much has changed and evolved. Kind of with everything I've seen with this is going to go right up to the top of my read list. I think probably with this selection right next to Dead Astronauts. Oh, this one I know nothing about, but I have heard this title before. Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. Okay, so I like what I'm reading in this description. So it looks like Mara is our main character, and she and her sisters are suffering at the hands of this abusive prince, so she makes a pact with a powerful grave witch, and she must do 3 impossible tasks, and then she'll get the powers to kill this guy. And of course, things will not go correctly. What I really like about this, and I'm sure this isn't quite the same political allegory, but I'm a huge fan of like Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, which is a similar kind of plot to that, where the main character has to complete 3 impossible tasks and then is given the tool essentially to their salvation. So that's already a hook for me. That's something I'm interested in trope-wise. So it would really be interesting to see if they're able to kind of break down and change some of what is going on in the genre, especially with other things that I've read, to see what can really stand out from this one. I do already like some kind of the dark tone that it's taking, and I do like the title. Nettle and Bone is a very descriptive and kind of engaging but offsetting kind of title. So I think this one's going to go on my book list, but maybe a little closer towards the center. And then finally, the last one out of our box is going to be Becky Chambers, A Psalm for the Wild-Built. Becky Chambers is the person who wrote The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which is a book I checked out of the library 3 years ago, was never able to read, and it has been sitting in the number 3 spot on my book list since that time, and I still have not gotten around to reading it. And I will absolutely be reading it because she's written like 4 of them and I've heard only good things about it. So already seeing her name as the author for this is very promising, and that definitely engages me. Yeah, I really like this inside cover. It seems that there's this group of robots that were just doing menial work for humans, and then they gained self-awareness and left. They laid down all their tools and they just went somewhere else. And now apparently centuries since, they came back, and one day a T-Monk is upended by the arrival of a robot, there to honor the old promises of checking in, and the robot asks, "What do people need?" And from what it sounds like, this is going to be a book about the robot getting many different answers to this question, as per the inside jacket. I already really enjoy the premise. I'm getting kind of Akira Kurosawa vibes from this. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but kind of the art suggests more like Japanese influence, and especially like Tea House, and just kind of the construction of this building on wheels and the person sitting out front of it, kind of just the way that they are angled towards the front view of the cover really suggests that. And I'm hoping that we do get a kind of more like roaming group of like these robots that are just suddenly showing up in a more samurai-esque way to see kind of what's going on in town and what they can help out with. And I'm assuming there's going to be like a good bit of depth into why they left initially and what they're looking to do now that they're back. So this is the kind of jacket that I like, because it gives you just enough to be interested in what it's talking about, but it doesn't outline too heavy genre tropes that you would be expecting that might make you say, I've read this before, and put the book down. But it also doesn't give you enough to really understand the full scope of the plot, so it kind of, you come up with questions and it really hooks you in. So I think this one is also going to go a little higher up in my reading list. Thank you so much for joining us today as we've gone through this mystery box of new books, and now as I spent the next 20 years of my life continuing to catch up with my ever-growing book list. Again, my name is Max. I'm here with the wonderful Westfield Athenaeum out in Westfield, Massachusetts. Be sure to follow us on our social medias, on our YouTube, Facebook. We are constantly putting out new content. If anything that you've seen is something that you enjoy, please take a look. Feel free to stop by our wonderful library and go ahead and check out a couple books.